Yo, welcome back. It's time for Mrs. Flowers, an excerpt from "I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings." While we read this book, we're asking this unit's essential question, which is, what are some milestones on the path to growing up? And then I look there on the left and I see all sorts of stuff like grandpa. He's got a lot of growing up, well, a little less growing up to do than someone who's young, someone who's 2 years old, maybe. I know that I'm probably going to have a narrative if it's Maya Angelou. I know that I'm going to get in here a little bit closer. Oh, she's going to go to someone's house in the story. It's nonfiction. Uh, it's set back in time. It's a character who'll be learning something. And what are milestones if not characters learning things? Then you look over here. Oh, I wonder if Marguerite will be the young one who's growing up. And Mrs. means probably married. So Mrs. Flowers might be the older one. I wonder what, there's learning. That was over here. Where's that? There we are. I see Angelou. All right. And I see all sorts of stuff. Why don't you take a moment, switch it over to orange, and let's, highlight a little bit that goes with the question that I did not highlight already. All right. So, prompt memoir, French from memory, is a very personal piece of nonfiction which has a theme or central idea like a work of fiction. Analyze the central idea in Mrs. Flowers by Maya Angelou. Use evidence from the excerpt to support your answer. Take a moment and you can put the red dots next to the prompt up there. And I'd like you to take a moment and go ahead and connect them to the two most important words. All right. So let's go ahead and get into the story. We're going to be looking for the central idea. The central idea gets the most attention. So, what seems to get the most attention in this story? All right, let's go ahead and get into the story. Maya Angelou was one of the world's most celebrated African American authors. Born Marguerite Johnson, Angelou struggled with racism, poverty, and ill treatment early in life. Uh, During her long career, she wore many hats. Oh, what does that expression mean, to wear many hats? She was a dancer, actress, singer, teacher, and writer, and Angelou was also known for her activism on behalf of women in the African American community. Background: in the early 1930s, when Maya Angelou was 3, her brother was 5, they went to live with their grandmother in Stamps. Angelou lived there until she was 10 years old. This selection is an excerpt from her well known autobiography, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. We lived with our grandmother and uncle in the rear of the store. It was always spoken of with a capital S, which she had owned some 25 years. Early in the century, Mama, we soon stopped calling her grandmother, sold lunches to the sawmen in a lumber yard, East Stamps, and the seedmen at the cotton gin, West Stamps. Her crisp meat pies and cool lemonade, when joined to her miraculous ability to be in two places at the same time, assured her business success. From being a mobile lunch counter, she set up a stand between the 2 points of fiscal interest and supplied the workers' needs for the New Year's. Then she had the store built in the heart of the black area. Over the years, it became the lay center of activities in town. On Saturdays, barbers sat their customers in the shade on the porch of the store, and the troubadours on their ceaseless crawlings through the South leaned across its benches and sang the sad songs of the Brazos while they played juice harps and cigar box guitars. The formal name of the store was uh, W.M. Johnson General Merchandise Store. Customers could find food staples, a good variety of colored thread, mash for hogs, corn for chickens, coal oil for lamps, light bulbs for the wealthy, shoestrings, hair dressings, balloon and flower seeds. Anything not visible had only to be ordered. Until we became familiar enough to belong to the store and it to us, we were locked up in a fun house of things where the attendant had gone home for life. Weighing the half pounds of flour, excluding the scoop, and the depositing them dust free into the thin paper sacks held a simple kind of adventure for me. I developed an eye for measuring how full a silver looking ladle of flour, mash, meal, sugar, or corn had to be to push the scale indicator over to 8 ounces or 1 pound. When I was absolutely accurate, our appreciative customers used to admire, Sister Henderson sure got some smart grandchildren. And if I was off in the store's favor, The eagle-eyed women would say, "Put some more in that sack, child. Don't you try to make your profit off of me." Then I would quietly but persistently punish myself for every bad judgment. The fine was no silver wrapped kisses, the sweet chocolate drops that I loved more than anything in the world except Bailey, and maybe canned pineapples. My obsession with pineapples nearly drove me mad. I dreamt of the days when I would be grown and be able to buy a whole carton for myself alone. Although the golden, syrupy golden rings sat in their exotic cans on our shelves year round, we only tasted them during Christmas. Mama used the juice to make almost black fruit cakes. Then she lined heavy soot encrusted iron skillets with the pineapple rings for rich upside down cakes. Bailey and I received one slice each, and I carried mine around for hours, shredding off the fruit until nothing was left except the perfume on my fingers. I like to think that my desire for pineapples was so sacred that I wouldn't allow myself to steal a can, which was possible, and eat it alone out in the garden. But I'm certain that I must have weighed the possibility of the scent exposing me, and I didn't have the nerve to attempt it. Until I was 13 and left Arkansas for good, the store was my favorite place to be. Alone and empty in mornings, it looked like an unopened present from a stranger. Opening the front doors was pulling off the ribbon, the unexpected gift. The light would come in softly, we faced north, easing itself over the shelves of mackerel, salmon, tobacco, thread. Fell flat on the big vat of lard, and by noontime during the summer the grease had softened to a thick soup. Whenever I walked into the store in the afternoon, I sensed that it was tired. I alone could hear the slow pulse of its job half done. But just before bedtime, after numerous people had walked in and out, had argued over their bills, or joked about their neighbors, or just dropped in to give Sister Henderson a hi all, the promise of magic mornings returned to the store and spread itself over the family in washed life waves. When Maya was about 10 years old, she returned to stamps from a visit to St. Louis with her mother, and she had become depressed and withdrawn.
Information to remind you of where this excerpt was taken from. Mrs. Flowers is from a volume of Maya Angelou's autobiography. When Angelou, born Marguerite Johnson, was a little girl, her parents separated. She and her brother Bailey were sent to Stamps, Arkansas to live with their grandmother, called Mama, who owned a general store. A year before meeting Mrs. Flowers, Marguerite had been violently assaulted by a friend of her mother's. In reaction, she became depressed and withdrawn, and she stopped speaking. Again, this is the story of Mrs. Flowers from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. For nearly a year, I sopped around the house, the store, the school, and the church like an old biscuit, dirty and inedible. Then I met, or rather got to know, the lady who threw me my first lifeline. Mrs. Bertha Flowers was the aristocrat of black stamps. She had the grace of control to appear warm in the coldest weather, and on the Arkansas summer days it seemed she had a private breeze which swirled around, cooling her. She was thin without the taut look of wiry people, and her printed voile dresses and flowered hats were as right for her as denim overalls for a farmer. She was our side's answer to the richest white woman in town. Her skin was a rich black that would have peeled like a plum if snagged. But then, no one would have thought of getting close enough to Mrs. Flowers to ruffle her dress, let alone snag her skin. She didn't encourage familiarity. She wore gloves, too. I don't think I ever saw Mrs. Flowers laugh, but she smiled often, a slow widening of her thin black lips to show even small white teeth, then the slow effortless closing. When she chose to smile on me, I always wanted to thank her. The action was so graceful and inclusively benign. She was one of the few gentlewomen I have ever known, and has remained throughout my life the measure of what a human being can be. One summer afternoon, sweet milk fresh in my memory, she stopped at the store to buy provisions. Another Negro woman of her health and age would have been expected to carry the paper sacks home in one hand, but Mama said, "Sister Flowers, I'll send Bailey up to your house with these things." She smiled and that slow dragging smile. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I prefer Marguerite, though. My name was beautiful when she said it. I've been meaning to talk to her anyway. They gave each other age group looks. There was a little path beside the rocky road, and Mrs. Flowers walked in front, swinging her arms and picking her way over the stones. She said, without turning her head to me, I hear you're doing very good schoolwork, Marguerite, but that it's all written. The teachers report that they have trouble getting you to talk in class. We passed the triangular farm at our left, and the path widened to allow us to walk together. I hung back in separate, unasked, and unanswerable questions. Come and walk along with me, Marguerite. I couldn't have refused, even if I wanted to. She pronounced my name so nicely. Or more correctly, she spoke each word with such clarity that I was certain a foreigner who didn't understand English could have understood her. Now, no one is going to make you talk. Possibly, no one can. But bear in mind, language is man's way of communicating with his fellow man, and it is language alone which separates him from the lower animals. That was a totally new idea to me, and I would need time to think about it. Your grandmother says you read a lot, every chance you get. That's good, but not good enough. Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with the shades of deeper meaning. I memorized the part about the human voice infusing words. It seemed so valid and poetic. She said she was going to give me some books and that I not only must read them, I must read them aloud. She suggested that I try to make a sentence sound in as many different ways as possible. I'll accept no excuse if you return a book to me that has been badly handled. My imagination boggled at the punishment I would deserve if, in fact, I did abuse a book of Mrs. Flowers. Death would be too kind and brief. The odors in the house surprised me. Somehow I had never connected Mrs. Flowers with food or eating or any other common experience of common people. There must have been an outhouse too, but my mind never recorded it. The sweet scent of vanilla had met us as she opened the door. I made some tea cookies this morning. You see, I had planned to invite you for cookies and lemonade so we could have this little chat. The lemonade is in the icebox. It followed that Mrs. Flowers would have ice on an ordinary day when most families in our town bought ice late on Saturdays, only a few times during the summer to be used in the wooden ice cream freezers. She took the bags from me and disappeared through the kitchen door. I looked around the room that I had never in my wildest fantasies imagined I would see. Brown photographs leered or threatened from the walls, and the white, freshly done curtains pushed against themselves and against the wind. I wanted to gobble up the room entire and take it to Bailey, who would help me analyze and enjoy it. Have a seat, Marguerite, over there by the table. She carried a platter covered with a tea towel. Although she warned that she hadn't tried her hand at baking sweets for some time, I was certain that, like everything else about her, the cookies would be perfect. They were flat, round wafers, slightly browned on the edges and butter yellow in the center. With the cold lemonade, they were sufficient for my childhood's lifelong diet. Remembering my manners, I took nice little ladylike bites off the edges. She said she had made them expressly for me and that she had a few in the kitchen that I could take home for my brother. So I jammed one whole cake in my mouth, and the rough crumbs scratched the inside of my jaws. And if I hadn't had to swallow, it would have been a dream come true. As I ate, she began the first of what we later called my lessons in living. She said that I must always be intolerable of ignorance, but understanding of illiteracy. That some people unable to go to school were more educated and even more intelligent than college professors. She encouraged me to listen carefully to what country people called mother wit, that in those homely sayings was couched the collective wisdom of generations. When I finished the cookies, she brushed off the table and brought a thick, small book from the bookcase. And I had read A Tale of Two Cities and found it up to my standards as a romantic novel. She opened the first page and I heard poetry for the first time in my life. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Her voice slid in and curved down through and over the words. She was nearly singing. I wanted to look at the pages. Were they the same that I have read? Or were there notes, music, lines on the pages as in a hymn book? Her sounds began cascading gently. I knew from listening to 1,000 preachers that she was nearing the end of her reading, and I hadn't really heard to understand a single word. How do you like that? It occurred to me that she expected a response. The sweet vanilla flavor was still on my tongue, and her reading was a wonder in my ears. I had to speak. I said, "Yes, ma'am." It was the least I could do, but it was the most also. "There's one more thing. Take this book of poems and memorize one for me. Next time you pay me a visit, I want you to recite it." I have tried often to search behind the sophistication of years for the enchantment I so easily found in those gifts. The essence escapes, but its aura remains. To be allowed, no, invited into the private lives of strangers, and to share their joys and fears, was a chance to exchange the southern bitter wormwood for a cup of mead with Beowulf, or a hot cup of tea and milk with Oliver Twist. When I said aloud, it is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. Tears of love filled my eyes at my selflessness. On that first day, I ran down the hill and into the road. Few cars ever came along it, and had the good sense to stop running before I reached the store. I was liked, and what a difference it made. I was respected not as Mrs. Henderson's grandchild or Bailey's sister, but for just being Marguerite Johnson. Childhood's logic never asks to be proved. All conclusions are absolute. I didn't question why Mrs. Flowers had singled me out for attention, nor did it occur to me that Mamma might have asked her to give me a little talking to. All I cared about was that she had made tea cookies for me and read to me from her favorite book. It was enough to prove to me that she liked me.
No.
And
So that ends Mrs. Flowers. Again, we're thinking about the memoir and we're thinking about what the central idea, what got the most attention in that excerpt. So we'll take the time to think about it as a TDA later in the week, but I hope you had a wonderful first reading. Way to be.